Uruguay is one of those countries that is easy to overlook on a map, but hard to ignore once you understand its story. Tucked between Brazil and Argentina, it covers about 176,000 square kilometers, making it small by South American standards. Its population is also modest, at roughly 3.5 million people, and nearly 2 million of them live in or around Montevideo, the capital. But Uruguay's importance has never depended on size alone. Its location at the mouth of the Rio de la Plata placed it at the edge of major Atlantic trade routes and between rival colonial powers. Over time, that geography helped turn Uruguay into a buffer, a battleground, and eventually an independent republic with a surprisingly strong national identity. Geographically, Uruguay belongs to the southern cone, the temperate lower part of South America that also includes Argentina and Chile. Unlike the Andes-dominated west of the continent or the Amazonian interior to the north, Uruguay is mostly made up of rolling plains, rivers, and coastline. Its southern edge faces the Rio de la Plata, the broad estuary that connects inland river systems to the Atlantic Ocean. To the southeast, Uruguay opens directly onto the Atlantic. This gives the country both an agricultural character and a maritime connection. It is not a land of extreme mountains or vast deserts. Its landscape is quieter, more open, and historically well suited to cattle raising, settlement, ports, and movement. Long before Uruguay existed as a country, the region was inhabited by hunter-gatherer peoples for thousands of years. Human presence in the area goes back around 13,000 years. By the time Europeans arrived, the Charrúa were among the most prominent indigenous groups, alongside peoples such as the Guarani and the Chana. These societies were not organized into large centralized states like the Inca or Aztec empires. That mattered greatly when colonization began. Smaller, more dispersed communities often faced devastating pressure from disease, displacement, warfare, and forced integration, while lacking the political scale to resist expanding European settlements. The indigenous history of Uruguay is therefore not a minor preface, but a central part of understanding how the region changed so dramatically. European contact began early, but colonization came later than in many neighboring areas. The Spanish explorer Juan Díaz de Solís reached the region in 1516, yet the territory did not immediately become a major colonial prize. Compared with zones rich in silver, gold, or dense indigenous labor systems, the area that became Uruguay seemed less urgent at first. That changed as imperial rivalry intensified. The Portuguese established Colonia do Sacramento in 1680, directly challenging Spanish influence near the Rio de la Plata. Spain responded by strengthening its own position, eventually founding Montevideo as a military stronghold. In other words, Uruguay's colonial development was shaped less by a single planned settlement process and more by competition between empires. Montevideo became central because it was not just a city, but a strategic answer to a problem. Whoever controlled the northern bank of the Rio de la Plata could influence access to inland trade routes and challenge rivals across the estuary. Spanish authorities saw Montevideo as a defensive and administrative anchor, a place to project power against Portuguese expansion and later against other regional forces. This helps explain why the capital became so dominant in Uruguay's national life. Even today, Montevideo is not merely the largest city, it is the political, cultural, and demographic center of the country. Uruguay's urban balance is unusual because so much of the nation's population and institutional weight is concentrated in one metropolitan area. Uruguay's path to independence was complicated because it was not simply a colony breaking away from one empire. Between 1811 and 1828, the region was caught in a four-way struggle involving Spain, Portugal, the United Provinces of the Rio de la Plata, and the Empire of Brazil. Different powers wanted influence over the territory because of its location and strategic value. Independence emerged through conflict, diplomacy, and regional balancing. Uruguay became a separate state in part because a small independent country could serve as a buffer between larger neighbors. In 1830, Uruguay enacted its constitution and formally established itself as an independent republic. Its birth was therefore both a national project and a geopolitical compromise. Independence did not immediately bring calm. In the decades that followed, Uruguay faced foreign intervention, internal conflict, and political instability. Two political forces became especially important: the Colorado Party and the National Party, often referred to together as the traditional parties. Their rivalry shaped national politics for generations and led to several civil wars in the 19th century. These conflicts were not just abstract party disputes. They reflected competing regional interests, leadership networks, social bases, and visions of how the young republic should be governed. Uruguay's later reputation for stability becomes more interesting when seen against this turbulent background. Stability was not automatic. It was built after long periods of conflict. One of the biggest forces shaping modern Uruguay was immigration. From the second half of the 19th century, large numbers of Europeans arrived, especially from Spain, Italy, and France. This migration changed the country's demographics, culture, architecture, food, politics, and social life. Uruguay became one of the most European-influenced societies in Latin America, particularly in Montevideo. That does not erase earlier indigenous, African, or regional roots, but it helps explain the country's distinctive cultural profile. The newcomers brought labor, skills, political ideas, and urban traditions. They also helped expand a society that increasingly saw itself as modern, secular, and connected to Atlantic currents beyond South America. In the early 20th century, Uruguay developed a reputation that set it apart. A wave of economic, labor, and social reforms helped create one of the most advanced welfare states in the region. The country became associated with public education, labor protections, secular institutions, and social legislation. Combined with a period of relative political stability, these reforms earned Uruguay the nickname the Switzerland of the Americas. The comparison was not about mountains or banking alone, but about an image of order, prosperity, institutional trust, and social progress. Of course, no nickname captures an entire country perfectly. But it shows how Uruguay came to be viewed as unusually stable and progressive within the Latin American context. That reputation was later tested. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Uruguay faced economic crises and rising political violence, including conflict involving far-left urban guerrilla movements. Social tensions grew, and democratic institutions came under pressure. In 1973, a coup d'état established a civic-military dictatorship. The dictatorship lasted until 1985, a dark period that disrupted Uruguay's democratic tradition and left deep scars. This chapter is important because it prevents a simplistic story of uninterrupted progress. Uruguay's democracy is respected today not because it was never threatened, but because the country experienced authoritarian rule and then rebuilt democratic governance after it ended. Modern Uruguay is a democratic constitutional republic, with a president serving as both head of state and head of government. In international comparisons, it often ranks highly for democracy, transparency, economic freedom, social progress, income equality, infrastructure, innovation, and per capita income. It is classified as a high-income economy, which is notable in a region often marked by sharp inequality and institutional volatility. Uruguay's success does not mean it has no problems, but its institutions have generally been stronger and more trusted than those of many neighbors. Its small size may even help in some ways, making governance more coherent and national debates easier to organize around shared institutions. Uruguay is also known for social liberalism. It became the first country in the world to fully legalize cannabis, and it has legalized same-sex marriage, abortion, and euthanasia. These policies reflect a broader political culture that has often emphasized secularism, individual rights, and pragmatic regulation rather than moral panic. Uruguay's reforms tend to draw international attention because they come from a small country willing to experiment with policies larger nations often debate for decades. This does not mean every citizen agrees on every issue. But it does show how Uruguay has repeatedly used law and public policy to define itself as a forward-looking society. Internationally, Uruguay plays a role larger than its population might suggest. It is a founding member of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and Mercosur, the South American trade bloc. Its position between Argentina and Brazil still matters, but today that role is expressed through diplomacy, trade, regional cooperation, and international institutions rather than colonial rivalry. Uruguay's story is ultimately the story of a small country shaped by borders, migration, reform, crisis, and recovery. It began as contested territory between empires and neighbors, but became a stable republic with a distinct voice. That is why Uruguay is not just a small country on the Atlantic edge of South America. It is a reminder that influence is not always measured in size. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.